The sign he can never hide. Have you ever looked into a man's eyes and felt that something had changed, even though his words remained exactly the same? Most people believe emotional attachment reveals itself through grand romantic gestures, constant messages, or dramatic confessions. But Carl Jung's understanding of the human psyche suggests something far more subtle and infinitely more powerful. According to Jungian psychology, the deepest emotions rarely announce themselves with noise. Instead, they quietly reshape a person's behavior in ways even they cannot fully understand. A man may convince himself that he is being logical, independent, or emotionally controlled, yet the unconscious has a language of its own, and sooner or later it always speaks. The fascinating truth is that when a man becomes genuinely emotionally attached, one unmistakable sign begins to appear again and again, regardless of his personality, age, or life experience. It is a sign that cannot be permanently hidden because it does not come from conscious intention. It emerges from the deepest layers of the psyche where love, fear, vulnerability, and identity silently interact. Ironically, many people completely miss this sign because they are searching for obvious displays of affection while ignoring the psychological pattern unfolding right in front of them. This is why someone can insist he doesn't care, while every unconscious action tells the opposite story. Jung believed that what we refuse to acknowledge consciously often expresses itself symbolically through behavior, attention, and emotional energy. And nowhere is this more visible than in human relationships. A man who has become emotionally attached may continue acting calm, confident, and even distant. Yet beneath that composed exterior, his unconscious mind begins reorganizing itself around another person. Without realizing it, he starts making choices that no longer revolve solely around himself. His thoughts become interrupted by unexpected memories. Ordinary moments suddenly remind him of someone specific, and decisions that once felt simple begin carrying emotional weight because another person's feelings have quietly entered his internal world. This transformation is rarely planned, and that is exactly what makes it so authentic. Emotional attachment is not merely attraction. It is the gradual merging of psychological importance. Someone else's happiness, safety, opinion, or absence begins influencing a man's emotional landscape, whether he admits it or not. The question is not whether this happens, it happens to nearly everyone who forms a deep bond, but whether we recognize the unmistakable signal before it disappears, behind pride, fear, or misunderstanding. And that brings us to the one sign that Carl Jung's psychological insights help us understand better than almost anyone else. A sign so revealing that once you notice it, you will never observe relationships the same way again.
His attention begins to follow you without effort.
If there is one signal that consistently appears when a man becomes emotionally attached, it is this. His attention naturally begins to orbit around you, even when he has no reason to force it. This is not the obsessive attention driven by insecurity or the performative attention meant to impress someone. It is quieter, deeper, and almost unconscious. Carl Jung viewed attention as a reflection of psychic energy, what he often described as libido in the broader psychological sense, not merely physical desire, but the life energy that flows toward what the psyche considers meaningful. When a man forms a genuine emotional attachment, his unconscious starts investing this energy into one particular person. He may be busy at work, surrounded by friends, or focused on personal goals, yet somehow his mind repeatedly returns to you. A random song reminds him of a conversation you once had. He notices something in a store and immediately wonders whether you would like it. He hears a joke and instinctively thinks, she would laugh at this. None of these moments are planned. In fact, he may not even realize they are happening. This is why emotional attachment is so difficult to hide. The conscious mind can choose silence, but the unconscious continually redirects attention toward what has become psychologically valuable. Jung believed that whatever carries emotional significance gradually becomes part of our inner world, and once someone enters that space, they begin influencing our perceptions in countless invisible ways. This is also why emotionally attached men often remember surprisingly small details that others forget. They remember the story you casually told weeks ago, the coffee you always order, the way your voice changed when you spoke about your family, or the dream you mentioned only once. These details are not stored because he is trying to collect information. They remain because his psyche has unconsciously labeled them as important. The deeper the attachment becomes, the more automatic this process is. Even when he deliberately tries to distance himself, his attention quietly returns, because emotional investment cannot simply be switched off. Many men even confuse this experience with distraction, wondering why they cannot stop thinking about someone despite convincing themselves that nothing serious is happening. The truth is that the unconscious has already made its decision before the conscious mind catches up. This explains why a man who claims he is fine may still check whether you arrived home safely. Notice immediately when something feels different about your mood, or sense your absence in places that once felt ordinary. His behavior begins revealing priorities that his words may never express. Yet this growing attention is only the beginning, because once emotional attachment reaches an even deeper level, another powerful psychological change quietly takes place, one that most people completely misunderstand. And according to Jungian wisdom, it reveals far more about the human heart than simple affection ever could. He begins to carry you inside his decisions. One of Carl Jung's most profound insights was that the people who truly matter to us gradually become part of our inner psychological world. And when this happens, we no longer make decisions as isolated individuals. Instead, the presence of another person silently begins influencing our choices, often without our awareness. This is exactly what happens when a man becomes emotionally attached. Before the attachment, his decisions are primarily guided by convenience, ambition, or personal preference. But afterward, something changes. He starts asking himself questions he never asked before. Will this affect her? Would she understand this choice? How would she feel if I disappeared for a while? These questions may never be spoken aloud, yet they begin shaping his behavior in subtle ways. He may rearrange his schedule simply to create an opportunity to see you. Not because you demanded it, but because spending time with you has unconsciously become valuable. He might decline invitations that once excited him because they now conflict with moments he hopes to share with you. Even his long-term goals can begin shifting not out of weakness, but because emotional attachment naturally expands a person's sense of identity. Jung believed that genuine relationships challenge the ego by forcing it to recognize that life is no longer centered entirely on the self. For many men, this can feel both beautiful and frightening. On one hand, they experience a deeper sense of purpose and connection. On the other, they realize that another person now has the power to affect their emotional balance. That realization often creates inner conflict, especially for men who have spent years believing they must remain completely self-reliant. This is why emotionally attached men sometimes appear inconsistent. One day they move closer, the next they seem distant. It is not always a lack of interest. Often it is the tension between the desire for closeness and the fear of vulnerability. Jung understood this struggle as a conflict between the protective ego and the unconscious longing for wholeness. The ego wants control, certainty, and independence, while the deeper psyche seeks authentic connection, even if it requires emotional risk. Eventually, the unconscious begins winning this quiet battle. You notice it in the smallest actions. He remembers your important dates without reminders. He starts planning further into the future instead of thinking only about today. He instinctively considers your comfort, your opinions, and even your silence before making certain choices. These are not calculated romantic gestures designed to earn affection. They are evidence that his inner world has quietly made room for someone else. And when another person begins living inside a man's decisions, there is one final transformation that becomes almost impossible to conceal, a transformation that reveals not only attachment, but the deepest truth about what his heart has already accepted, even if his words still hesitate to say it. The moment his mask begins to crack. Carl Jung believed that every person wears a persona, a carefully constructed mask designed to function in society, protect the ego, and hide emotional vulnerability. For many men, this persona is built around strength, certainty, and emotional control. They learn to appear unaffected, to solve problems instead of discussing feelings, and to convince both themselves and others that nothing can shake their inner balance. But emotional attachment has a remarkable way of testing that mask. The deeper a man cares, the more difficult it becomes to keep every emotion hidden behind logic and composure. This is where the one undeniable sign grows even clearer. His attention no longer follows you only in private. It begins influencing the emotions he can no longer fully control. You may notice it when your silence affects his mood more than he expected, when a brief misunderstanding stays on his mind long after the conversation has ended, or when your happiness brings him an unexpected sense of relief. These reactions are rarely intentional. They happen because your emotional state has quietly become connected to his own. Jung would argue that the unconscious cannot remain hidden forever. Whatever the ego tries to suppress eventually finds another way to express itself. A man may insist that he is not emotionally invested, yet his behavior starts revealing concern where none existed before. He notices when something feels different about your voice. He senses when your energy changes, even if you claim everything is fine. He becomes unusually patient with your flaws while growing, unexpectedly sensitive to the possibility of losing your trust. None of this happens because he has suddenly become less rational. It happens because emotional attachment reshapes what the psyche considers important. And when something becomes psychologically important, the unconscious protects it almost automatically. This is why emotionally attached men often reveal themselves through moments they never planned. They look for reassurance without directly asking for it. They become unusually thoughtful after conflict instead of simply walking away. They remember conversations that seemed insignificant because, to them, those moments carried emotional meaning. Even when pride tells them to remain distant, their actions quietly move them back toward connection. The persona can delay this process, but it cannot stop it forever. Sooner or later, the carefully controlled image begins to crack, allowing genuine emotion to appear through small expressions, subtle concern, unexpected kindness, or an almost instinctive desire to remain present in your life. That is the paradox Jung understood so well. The more a person tries to hide what truly matters, the more the unconscious finds creative ways to reveal it. And once this inner barrier begins to fall, one final realization emerges, one that explains why a deeply attached man eventually reaches a point where pretending no longer feels possible, because his heart has already accepted a truth that his mind is still struggling to admit. The truth his heart can no longer hide. In the end, Carl Jung's greatest lesson about human relationships was never that love makes us weak. It was that genuine emotional attachment makes us honest, whether we intend it or not. The one sign that always appears is not constant texting, dramatic declarations, or endless compliments. It is the quiet but unmistakable shift of a man's psychological attention and emotional energy towards someone who has become part of his inner world. Once that happens, his actions begin revealing what his words may still be trying to conceal. He notices the smallest changes in you, because your emotional state has become meaningful to his own. He remembers details because they are no longer ordinary facts. They are connected to someone his unconscious values. He naturally considers your presence when making decisions because, deep inside, his identity has expanded beyond himself. He struggles with distance not because he lacks discipline, but because genuine attachment cannot simply be erased by logic. This is why Jung believed that the unconscious always leaves traces. We may hide our feelings behind pride, fear, or carefully chosen words, but our behavior continues telling the truth. Yet there is an important distinction that many people overlook. Emotional attachment does not automatically mean emotional maturity. A man can care deeply and still struggle to communicate. He can love sincerely and still carry unresolved fears, childhood wounds, or insecurities that make vulnerability feel dangerous. Jung repeatedly emphasized that every person must confront their own shadow, the hidden fears, defenses, and emotional patterns that quietly shape their lives. Without this inner work, even genuine attachment can become confused by avoidance, silence, or misunderstanding.
That is why the healthiest relationships are not
Built on guessing someone's feelings, but on two people who are willing to become more conscious of themselves and each other. Real love is not about perfection. It is about the courage to lower the mask, face the shadow, and allow another human being to see who we truly are beneath our defenses. When a man reaches that point, the sign is no longer subtle. His consistency replaces uncertainty. His presence replaces excuses. His actions become aligned with his emotions because the conflict between the ego and the heart finally begins to disappear. And perhaps that is Jung's deepest wisdom of all. We do not truly connect with another person by pretending to be fearless. We connect by having the courage to be authentic. So the next time you wonder whether a man's feelings are real, don't focus only on what he says. Watch where his attention goes, what his actions protect, what his mind remembers, and whose well-being quietly becomes part of his own. The unconscious rarely lies, and genuine emotional attachment always leaves a pattern for those who know how to see it. If this perspective helped you understand human psychology in a new way, leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Subscribe for more insights inspired by Carl Jung and timeless psychology. And remember, the deepest truths about the heart are often spoken long before a single word is ever said.